Brought to you by the Astro Youth House chapter from STEM Arts Lab, Space on Earth is a student-led podcast that inspires listeners who are curious about space to explore the wonders of the universe through the voices of young thinkers, creators, and dreamers.
Each episode blends personal curiosity with scientific discovery, from the mysterious depths of black holes to the practical impacts of space on Earth, like GPS, climate science, and medicine.
Hosted by STEM Arts students from Taos, New Mexico, this podcast draws connections between space, art, and science, how these things all impact us here on Earth, and their meaning to humanity.
You'll hear raw, insightful conversations about topics like light pollution, the overview effect, lunar exploration, and the societal impact of the space race.
Whether you're into exoplanets, dark energy, or just stargazing from your backyard, Space on Earth makes space personal, accessible, and inspiring. We believe that space isn't just for astronauts and scientists, it's for everyone.
Join us on this adventure as we explore the cosmos from Earth, one story at a time.
Special thanks to the Lore Foundation for helping launch this podcast.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Space on Earth. I'm Taylor.
I'm Wyatt.
And I'm Ophelia.
And today we're going to be talking to you guys about the Artemis III mission. So if you guys have been listening to our podcast for a while, you've heard all the coverage that we did on Artemis II. But now that Artemis III is really getting ready and going, we're going to talk about that a bit more, explore that, and we'll be keeping you guys updated. So Wyatt, do you want to talk about just some intro information?
Yeah, so basically, earlier this year on April 1st, Artemis II launched with Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen. All basically, that was the first crewed flight test of the Orion spacecraft, and also our grand return of going beyond low Earth orbit for the first time since 1972. It was the second flight of the Space Launch System rocket. They flew by the moon and they got really amazing photos, even with their own iPhones. I guess NASA doesn't call them iPhones, they call them personal electronic devices or something. I don't remember what the PR name was. But basically, yeah, it was the first time humans have been very far away from Earth since 1972, since the Apollo program ended with Apollo 7 and Artemis. Yes, it's NASA's mission on basically just Apollo, but this time we're gonna stay on the moon, and then we're gonna live there, and then we're gonna go to Mars. So when NASA announced the Artemis program, many people assumed Artemis III would be the mission that returned astronauts to the lunar surface. For years, that was the plan. But in 2026, since we got our amazing, awesome new NASA curator, astronaut Jared Isaacman, to take charge, he made a major change, but in my opinion, it is a really good change of plans. Earlier this year, Jared Isaacman decided that Artemis III would no longer land on the moon. Instead, it would become one of the most complex spacecraft integration missions ever attempted in low Earth orbit. Artemis III is now designed to test the hardware, docking procedures, and operational concepts that future lunar missions will depend on. Orion, SpaceX, Blue Origin, NASA, and a bunch of other international partners will all come together in a mission that looks less like Apollo 11 and more like Apollo 9, a critical test flight before humanity's return to the lunar surface. Today, we're breaking down all of Artemis III, the crew selected to fly it, and why this mission may ultimately determine the success of the entire Artemis program.
So why exactly did they make that change? What was the thought process there? And why, what was the reason, and what specifically are they going to be doing?
Good question. Basically, we had Artemis I, which was the first launch of SLS and Orion, totally uncrewed. Then we had Artemis II. Well, Artemis I was back in November 2022. With the Apollo program let me try to correlate this. Apollo 7 was the first crewed test of the Apollo command module in low Earth orbit in maybe it was 67. I think it was 68. And a few months later, emphasis on months, it did take them 2.5 years to build the next rocket. Then Apollo 8 was basically just Artemis 2. Launch with a crew and go fly around the moon and then come back. Apollo 9, they launched in low Earth orbit with the crew module and the lunar lander. Since Saturn V, the rocket that was used for the Apollo program, it would carry the crew module and the lander module all in one rocket. So they could test the lunar module in low Earth orbit, test the control systems like the maneuvering systems. Then Apollo 10, they went back, they orbited the moon, they got into orbit of the moon, and then this was the dress rehearsal ahead of the actual landing. They would get into the lunar module, descend, but I'm not exactly how close to the ground they got. It was at least a few miles above the surface, and they actually started to ascend again back to get back into lunar orbit, to then dock with the command module. So they didn't actually land on Apollo 10, and then Apollo 11, as we all know, they landed along with Apollo 12, not 13. They had an issue with that one, 14, 15, 16, and 17. This is one of the key differences between Apollo and Artemis. Apollo, the Saturn V rocket, carried both the crew module and the lunar module, the module that would actually land on the moon. SLS only launches the crew module. The Orion can't land on the moon. It's just meant to orbit the moon and then go re-enter Earth's atmosphere and land. So that meant NASA contracted SpaceX and Blue Origin to build their own lunar landers that could meet with Orion in the orbit of the moon. So Blue Origin would build their Blue Moon vehicle that would have two versions. Blue Moon 1 would be just for cargo and science payload landings on the moon. And then Blue Moon Mark II could actually carry crew. Now, a bunch of things have changed, and now I guess they're doing a Blue Moon Mark 1.5, where it's a bit bigger than Mark 1, but it can also hold crew also. And then SpaceX would be taking their Starship rocket and then just doing a slightly, but not really slightly, it's a huge change of just making a whole different variants that would be able to land on the moon. So with Starship, it's called HLS, Human Landing System. The Starship HLS variant, yes. So it would have aerodynamic flaps, heat shield tiles. It would have landing legs to land on the surface of the moon. It would have a cabin crew up on the top. And comparing the size of HLS and Blue Moon, it's crazy. Starship is currently 52.5 meters tall. And then Blue Moon Mark 1 or Mark 1.5 or Mark 2. The Blue Moon variants are way smaller compared to HLS, probably only 15 meters or something. I don't exactly remember, but right. Why the change of plans? Exactly, yes. So just going with Artemis 2, basically just the Apollo 8 version of Artemis, you just launch, fly by the moon, and then land, and then going straight to landing on the moon with Artemis 3 with having no human testing of your lunar lander. That's scary. That's pretty dangerous. So now Artemis 3 is just going to low Earth orbit with Orion, its crew, and will dock in space with Blue Moon and Starship. That means Artemis 4 will now be the first moon landing. So it basically just allows NASA to reduce risks. And it Kinda, yes, it does give Blue Origin and SpaceX more time to mature their lander systems. And it just lets NASA test critical systems before committing astronauts to an actual landing.
Wyatt, I know you said that you thought this was a good change, but objectively, is it a setback or is it really the smarter move?
Taking a brief glance at it, it is a bit disappointing, but they needed to make this change. It's not like I don't trust NASA. They know what they're doing a good percent of the time, but it's just a huge jump from just going to crude flyby, not testing your lander at all, and then next mission, landing on the moon. That's risky. It really just depends on perspective. It delays the landing itself, but follows the Apollo-like test philosophy. And it's honestly just way better to discover problems in miles away from Earth. It's better to discover problems in Earth orbit than all the way in the orbit of the moon or on the actual surface of the moon. So yeah, just really focus on mission success rather than rushing a landing. Because I guess in the more political aspect of this, we have had the risk of China beating us to the moon, but yet technically, I guess you can call it a second space race. But honestly, looking at how the Chinese space program is doing, I don't think we have a huge risk of them beating us to the moon. And if they do, honestly, good for them. But I think we are way ahead of them to getting boots on the moon. We are the only country to have had humans on the moon. Once Apollo 11 landed, Russia basically just gave up their Russia space program back in the 70s, or their lunar program. Their N1 rocket that was supposed to land on the moon blew up 4 times. It never made it to orbit. China has gotten really far in their spaceflight program. They have their own crewed space station up in orbit, the Tiangong, which holds, I think, 3 people. But I think they could land on the moon a few years after us. Space is hard, all that.
So, when we're talking a bit more about the mission itself, like how they've decided it to be with the changes, what exactly will Artemis 3 do?
All right. So basically, yes, the 4 astronauts who we're going to get into the crew later, don't worry, they're going to launch on Orion and SLS from pad 39B in Florida. They're going to actually stay in low Earth orbit for around 2 weeks, if I remember correctly. And then actually, before SLS launches with the crew, Blue Moon will launch with Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket, but Blue Moon will actually arrive in low Earth orbit first. It can actually loiter in low Earth orbit for around 90 days, which is honestly pretty impressive. So then after Blue Moon launches and Artemis 3 is all ready to go, then Artemis 3 will launch. They will, yes, be in orbit for around 2 weeks, and then Orion and Blue Moon will rendezvous and dock in low Earth orbit first. There will be 2 days of docked operations with Blue Moon. So Blue Moon is going to be this weird hybrid of Mark 1 and Mark 2 of Blue Moon. So it's going to have an actual pressurized cabin for the crew, but it's not going to have any landing engines. So it's not like after this is all done, Blue could just go send it and land it on the moon after this. No, it's just going to get deorbited and burn up in the Earth's atmosphere, most likely. And then I think a few days after Orion arrives in low Earth orbit, then Starship will launch from most likely Florida. So basically, originally, what we all thought was going to happen is that SpaceX would actually send a fully built up Starship HLS with a pressurized cabin landing engines, because Starship HLS has its own separate landing engines at the top of the vehicle, which we've actually seen no actual hardware on, which is a little bit concerning, but SpaceX will be SpaceX. They'll figure it out. Anyways, for Artemis 3, they aren't actually going to send a full HLS. Basically, what they're going to do is they're just going to launch a fully normal Starship with a docking port, and that's it. So the crew will not enter Starship at all. It's just going to be most likely a expendable Starship. I doubt it'll have heat shield tiles and flaps and everything. So it's just a little bit concerning, in my opinion, that SpaceX doesn't think that they'll be ready to have a full HLS to do crew testing with, but yet never bet against SpaceX. Their upper stage blew up on the test stand and they still launched 2 months later last year. But yeah, that basically sums it up.
You mentioned the mission is staying in Earth orbit. Why is that such a big deal?
Good question. Yeah, it's just there's going to be multiple spacecraft, multiple companies, multiple launch campaigns, and they're testing new docking and mission operations. And it's the first integrated Artemis commercial lander test. And it'll be the first time Orion docks with lunar landing hardware. It's a really good idea to test all this stuff ahead of time before we actually aim for the moon.
And so when we talk about Orion's role in this mission, because there's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot going on. So what will Orion be doing, like specifically?
Yeah, Orion, just like Artemis II, keeping our crew of 4 alive. It's basically just going to serve as the mission command center. It's going to be performing rendezvous operations, test docking hardware, demonstrate crew transfers between Orion and Blue Moon. And the biggest thing is it's evaluating life support systems for longer durations than Artemis 2. Artemis 2 was only 8 days, but Artemis 3, they said that it's going to last up to 2 weeks. So honestly, that's pretty exciting. I think that's one of the biggest things I'm excited for this mission. And then also it's just another time that they can test the heat shield of Orion, because Artemis 1, the heat shield had some unexpected damage on it back in 2022, but then they improved it and made changes ahead of Artemis 2. And after Artemis 2, Orion's heat shield looked way better compared to Artemis 1. So this is just going to give them another time to test the heat shield.
Awesome. And is this Orion's first docking mission?
Yes. Yeah, it is. Artemis 1 had no crew, just fly around the moon and just see how Orion reacts. Artemis 2, they did do, and this was pretty cool. I remember watching this live and I was like, whoa. They actually did proximity operations with the upper stage that got them into orbit. So basically the crew separated from the upper stage, and Victor Glover, the pilot, he was able to manually control Orion and safely get up close to it. They had a little docking target, or not docking. They couldn't dock to the upper stage. They had a little target, like a bullseye for darts, to just seeing how well the reaction control systems handle on Orion and see if they can match the speed of the upper stage. And they did. So Artemis 3, Orion's going to be docking in space twice. Of course, they have tested docking systems on the ground. I'm pretty sure that was back in 2023. So it's a huge milestone for Orion.
Awesome. And you were also talking about Blue Moon. And so let's go a bit more into that, about what exactly is the role that Blue Origin is playing in all of this.
So, as I explained earlier, Blue Moon Mark 1 is just going to be the cargo variants that NASA's contracting Blue Origin to do for their commercial lunar payload services program, just to launch scientific payloads and land them on the moon. Then there's Blue Moon Mark II, which is planned to be the first time Blue Moon would carry crew. But now Artemis III is expected to use a Pathfinder version. I like to call it Blue Moon Mark 1.5. It represents future lunar landing architecture, but it's just the crew cabin. There is no actual landing engines or anything like that. And the crew should hopefully actually enter the vehicle depending on the final mission plan. But I'd be surprised if they didn't want to enter Blue Moon once they dock to it. That'd be crazy to me. Yeah, it's just the opportunity to test interfaces and procedures.
Why is NASA working with multiple lunar landing companies?
Competition. Competition encourages innovation, and it also reduces dependence on a single provider. It's similar to the commercial crew program approach, where when was SpaceX contracted? Can't really remember. It was 2015 or something. NASA, I guess it was actually probably quite earlier than that. NASA, they retired their space shuttle in 2011. So that meant the only way to get American astronauts to the space station was with the Russian Soyuz, which could only carry 3 people. And it was very cramped. And that spacecraft has been flying since the 60s. It's old, man. So NASA contracted SpaceX and Boeing to develop a vehicle that could carry crew to the International Space Station. So SpaceX made their Dragon spacecraft, I guess Dragon version 2 spacecraft. Dragon version 1 was already carrying cargo way before the contract started. And then they made Dragon version 2, which could carry crew. They could carry up to 7 people, but NASA decided they only needed 4 people for their crew rotations. It just provides redundancy, and it gives NASA options for future lunar missions.
You mentioned SpaceX, and I know you mentioned Starship earlier. What exactly is Starship doing on Artemis 3?
Now let's actually move on to the crew, which NASA recently announced on June 9th. So Taylor, who's flying on this mission?
So we have a crew of 4 different people are going to be sent up, but technically there's 5 people on the crew. So we have Randy Bresnik, who's going to be our commander, Luca Parmitano, who's going to be our pilot for this mission, Frank Rubio and Andre Douglas are our mission specialists, and Bob Hines is a backup crew member.
Can you tell us more about Randy Bresnik?
Yeah, totally. So like I said, he's going to be commanding this mission. He is a veteran NASA astronaut. He's a former space shuttle crew member and an ISS commander. So he has a lot of experience doing operational work. And he really fits as a great commander for a complex test mission like this.
All right. So then what can you tell about our pilot, Luca Parmitano?
So a big deal with him specifically is he's joining this mission through the European Space Agency. He's a former ISS commander and a veteran spacewalker, and he was the first Italian commander of the ISS. And this is really, I think his inclusion onto this project is really highlighting the international collaboration of the Artemis mission as a whole.
I think I remember something about Frank Rubio having a really unique mission with NASA. Is that correct?
Yeah, so Frank Rubio originally launched for a standard ISS mission, and he ended up spending over a year in space. And so he currently holds the record for the longest single US space flight. And he has just really valuable experience from that's going to be used for future deep space missions. And so he's definitely a good member to have on the crew.
And then how about our final mission commander, Andre Douglas?
So he's actually the newest member of the crew. He's an engineer and a planetary scientist. And he's previously worked on some lunar architecture studies, which is super cool. And he really represents the next generation of Artemis astronauts, I feel like. So that's some information about everything that's going on with our amazing crew. Like the last time we're seeing just very experienced, very educated people who are going to be doing this. And it is a pretty big deal that we have an astronaut from the European Space Agency. So, actually, Wyatt and Ophelia, do you guys want to talk a bit about the cultural impact of Artemis 3?
Sure, I can take this one. Artemis 3 is a lot more about international cooperations and commercial partnerships, with including so many different companies and organizations. It's really a monumental mission. It's also focusing on Artemis as a whole is focusing on sustainable exploration and a longer term presence beyond Earth. And it's a part of its main goal is to prepare to go to Mars as well as the moon.
Ophelia, what message do you think this crew sends?
I think this crew really represents international cooperation and representation. I think it's a really big step in NASA and ESA working together. It also includes a lot of diverse professional backgrounds, which allows allows the crew to have a lot more experience and new opportunities. It also begins making exploration more of a global effort rather than a competition.
Why do you think that people should care about a mission that isn't even leaving low Earth orbit?
I think a major reason that people should care about this mission is because exploration is built on preparation and making, like you said earlier, making a jump from Artemis 2 to Artemis 3 being the first one to land on the moon would be a bit extreme and it wouldn't necessarily be the smartest idea. Historical missions have often had unseen test flights or unseen tests. And I think the fact that this one is so well known is a really big step. Success in this mission also enables future lunar landings because we will have been more experienced and more prepared. Artemis 3 could also be remembered as the mission that made Artemis 4 possible and the reason that Artemis as a whole succeeds. Now, Taylor and Wyatt, do you want to talk about how this will look in the future and what looking ahead can look?
Yeah, totally. So, Wyatt, what does success look like for Artemis 3?
Good question. I think success would look like, of course, a safe launch of Orion in safe reentry and splashdown, successful rendezvous and docking operations with Blue Moon and Starship, and then the crew actually interacting with the systems of Blue Moon, and then validation of procedures for future lunar missions, and then actually getting data ahead of Artemis 4.
If Artemis 3 goes well, what will happen next?
Then next we'll have Artemis 4, and if all does go well, we will be headed for the moon. Artemis 3 is aiming to launch mid 2027. NASA wants Artemis 4 and Artemis 5 to both fly in 2028. So Artemis 4 will be the first landing on the moon with either Blue Moon or Starship being the lander. And then we are finally going to be in a good place where we can start building a place for us to live on the moon. So I think that's going to wrap it up for today's episode. Today, I went over why did Artemis 3 change from being a mission to land on the moon to just being a training mission in low Earth orbit, and also just the entire overview and the roles of NASA, Blue Origin, and SpaceX.
And you guys also heard a bit about our incredible crew that's going to be working on this mission.
And I talked a bit about the message that the crew sends and just the general importance of Artemis and Artemis III in particular.
And yeah, so we also talked about going forward, and we're definitely making a series of our Artemis mission episodes. So look for more of them in the future. That is all we have for you guys today. Thank you all so much for listening and supporting us here at Space on Earth. If you want to know any more information about our program or what we're doing, check out stemarts.com for more information on our organization. Thank you all again so much for listening. I'm Taylor,
I'm Wyatt.
And I'm Ophelia.
and we'll see you all next time.